They were the opening act for Journey when I saw them a few years ago, right? I'm talking about the Journey concert coming through Cadence Bank Arena next June up in Tupelo.
I saw Journey in 1988 in the Coast Coliseum,
in
I think.
The Prime. Man.
Yeah, Prime.
Wow.
That's
awesome.
I think that was my first experience with, shall we say, that was wafting around the well, I mean, we can say it, we've now legalized part of it, so the stuff, it was floating around up there.
That was kind of common back then. That voice you hear, of course, is Senator Brice Wiggins, represents District 52, Jackson County, serves as chair of the Senate Judiciary A Committee. Senator, been a while. Good to have you in the studio today. So
yeah, good to be here.
Appreciate
Thank you for having me.
So, are you in town doing some work?
We have a joint public health committee meeting at the Capitol between the House and Senate public health committees.
Okay.
About this morning was infant mortality, and then this afternoon I'll be headed back there. It's on mental health. So, and what we saw on the infant mortality, the stats they're not good. We're doing really good in education. We're not doing good in that, and so we need to get our heads around it.
Dr. Dan Edney, of course, the chief health officer of the state, just in here last week discussing that. You know, he pays a lot of attention to that. He is health focused, I think, in that position than anybody we've ever had. I mean,
Right.
He really is hyper focused on the health of Mississippi citizens, and he also makes the point that I think is spot on, is totally valid, that it also affects our economy.
It most definitely does.
Yeah.
When I got Chevron down in my neck of the woods, in my district, they recruit nationally. And they literally recruit people and trying to bring people from other places for engineers, and you can bet that they look at stuff like that, because when people come in, they're going, what is it if I'm raising a family? What does that look like? Now, fortunately, down where, and the stats bear that out, down where I'm at, relatively speaking, we fare well.
Yeah.
But we've got to do that for all of Mississippi.
Right. Totally agree. And the infant mortality is I've had discussions with Dr. Edney, and I'm sure you're aware, so much of that is avoidable.
It is, and you heard some of that today at the hearing, where and he said you cannot separate infant mortality from mother health, and that led to some other questions. Representative Missy McGee made that point. The mothers have to be healthy, you can't wait, and health is a determining factor of that. And there's a lot of factors that go into it, but you have to be cognizant about that.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, I've had the fortune of touring the neonatal intensive care unit at UMC, not far from where we are. Got a guided tour about 5 years ago. And it'll change you, just walking in that big room with all those fantastic nurses running around with smiles on their faces and springs in their step, taking care of these little bitty sick babies. And when I posed the question to, some of the healthcare professionals, how much of this was avoidable? Like almost all of it.
Yes, that's right.
I honestly would like to suggest perhaps that maybe you guys could work with UMC. The entire legislature ought to take a tour. I'm serious.
I'm all for that. We need to do that. But on to your point about responsibility, so that I actually try to put my words into action. So if people know this if you follow my social media, but I've embarked on getting a better lifestyle, healthier lifestyle, and I've actually been running 5Ks and stuff. And part of that was changing my diet. And, my doctor, I went into my doctor and he said, Brice, your blood pressure is through the roof. And we have history. And I said, well, doctor, dealing with politicians and lawyers tends to raise my blood pressure. Yeah. And so I had to do something. But the most interesting thing was I changed my diet, what I was eating, got more focused. Yeah. And I feel, it's been good.
Yeah.
And my point is, it's responsibility, and it's what you said. I mean, and my doctor, he's like, I asked him, I said, well, why didn't you tell me early? And he's like, I did. You just have to go do it. And it's not like it's not out there. And then I started, quote, shopping for more healthier foods. Lo and behold, I found them.
Yeah.
Like, I just wasn't, me personally, I just wasn't looking at them for them.
It doesn't take that much adjustment to have an effect.
So, and you know, so there's a combination of all that, but we have to take ownership of that.
100%. Well, hopefully, and a lot of that, as you know, requires education of our population to understand some of these healthy practices.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And people, you know, you don't know what you don't know, but we need to be assisting in that. But you know, there were discussions about payments and help. I'm not sure about all that. It's apparently worked in Michigan. That's what we heard today. I think the first step is taking responsibility for yourself, and that's what we got to do.
We got to impress that, I should say, on people, that they understand how critical that is to.
So if you want to run a 5K with me, I challenge you to do that.
Well, I kind of hypertension runs in my family as well, and so I try to walk almost every night 2.5 miles with my dog.
Yeah.
It's kind of hilly, but as you know, just that little bit of exercise like that, and we walk fairly briskly.
There's so much data now that they've been doing. I mean, stuff like that, and they say just doing that helps
big time.
And I was at Ocean Springs Rotary actually yesterday, and the talk was on dementia, and the doctor from Singing River Hospital System said what they're finding is if you're elderly and you just get out and walk, it actually reverses part of this. The research is showing it reverses part of that. Is that, you know, it's not definitive, but the research is showing that if you're healthy, you can stave off dementia and that kind of stuff, and Alzheimer's.
That's awesome. All right, in the political world, of course, we had special elections in the state of Mississippi on Tuesday. We've covered those in detail here on the show. We certainly did yesterday, but of course, the big news is that the Republicans no longer have the supermajority in the Senate, and the Democrats are celebrating this like they've absolutely won the Mega Millions lottery. I feel like they're a little over their skis here because the supermajority comes into play in a fairly limited amount of situations in lawmaking.
Yeah, exactly. I gave an interview to WLBT yesterday, and look, first let me say, hey, elections have consequences, and it was a good night for the Democrats. Yeah. Okay, you know what? Guess what? If 2 years ago or whatever, when the Republicans, we were out sending out our press releases and championing and all that. Yeah. But let this be a lesson in how politics is fickle. Okay. Now on that point, supermajority. Look, the reality is everything comes down to a vote, and I went back and looked, and in our law and Constitution, there's really only 3 things that require a 2/3 vote. 2 of those, since I've been in the legislature since 2013, we hadn't done. The other one is suspension of the rules, which only has been done in certain instances. And I will tell you, Gerard, honestly, there's been some recalcitrant Republicans who refuse to go along, and that's a fact. Okay. And those things, I know people have their opinions, but suspension of the rules was done with the change of the flag. Democrats actually were voting for it. There were Republicans who didn't. Okay. So in
you
terms
got the necessary 2/3.
You get the necessary 2/3, and some would say it doesn't matter where you get it from, depending on the issue. Yeah. So yes, if you're saying, oh, we broke the supermajority, well, you know, it was expected because of the way the districts played out.
Yeah.
But
after the DOJ said go redraw those things, you kind of knew that would be the outcome.
Yeah, that's right. I think, but that's also not to say that we as Republicans don't need to heed some of the warnings, 100%. And I'm willing to talk about that.
Okay, let's do that on the other side of the break. It's Senator Brice Wiggins from Jackson County in the Element. For this segment, we've got Senator Brice Wiggins from Jackson County in the Element Well studio. So, we kind of covered I would think kind of a nothing burger, honestly, with the Democrats winning races they should have won in the state Senate after redistricting occurred. But we got a bigger thing going on at the national level, as you well know, a case that has made its way to the Supreme Court dealing with congressional district drawing lines, boundaries. Louisiana, I think, kind of the main plaintiff in that case at the Supreme Court. They seem to be leaning towards maybe striking down that practice as being what the Voting Rights Act was all about. That's where all that stems from. And you've got California redistricting, Texas redistricting. What a mess! But I'm wondering, Senator, if the Supreme Court says, "Hey, look, you can't order the states to go draw lines solely on the basis of race because you think that that particular district ought to have someone of a particular race to effectively and fairly represent the constituents." If they strike that down, should you guys be drawing new lines for District 1 here, or 2, pardon me, in the United States congressional seats in Mississippi? That would be Benny Thompson's.
Throw me a question I didn't expect there,
well,
so thank
fine.
you. No.
It's just something I've been thinking about.
No, it's good.
Like, we ought to have legislation teed up, ready to go.
Well, so let me say this.
Okay.
So first, I'm no expert legally on redistricting law and all that.
Okay.
I was on the redistricting committee, and I can tell you from that experience, but in being a lawyer, there is all kinds of laws, not just race, that are involved in that. And so my point is that in Mississippi, the way it's done, it's not just race. There's a whole bunch of other things.
Okay.
On the race issue, to your point, the Supreme Court over time has said that race alone cannot be a standard. They did that in I think it's the University of Michigan law school applications. They have set that precedent, which I totally agree with. It should not be the sole factor on that. And so if you're looking at the tea leaves, you can expect that if that's the issue, and I don't know all the briefed issues on that's probably where that's going to go. Now, let me say this, that I actually think the Supreme Court's trying to figure all this out because a couple years ago there was a Alabama case, and they actually upheld, or no, they said Alabama had to redistrict. There was also another case in the South where they said they had to redistrict. They did it with us. So now they're going to say, and now the prognosticators are saying, well, now they're going to strike down that. So it gets very specific and very technical.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, what I think where things will kind of lay out is it can't be the sole issue for making determination. And mind you, if you look back in the 70s and all, when all of this 60s and 70s, when all this kind of started, the Supreme Court and those decisions said you can do it because to correct wrongs from the past, and I'm paraphrasing.
Okay.
That's what they said. Okay, and that's why in the University of Michigan case for the law school, they said race cannot be the sole factor to do this, but it can be a factor in when you admit people.
I got you.
It's where they put it on the pyramid, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that's why I guess lawyers get paid money to make these arguments.
I mean, Harvard, right? The
Harvard's
case.
the same.
Yeah.
Right.
When struck down the so-called affirmative action in admissions.
Right. Exactly. Because race was used as a reason. I'm sorry. It got put in that position to quote correct the past.
Yeah.
And actually, in the Michigan case, if I'm not mistaken, Chief Justice Roberts said it may, or one of the justices said it may have been good then, and nobody can deny progress has been made for in the last 40 years, whatever, 50 years. And so is it time that is no longer the case? And I think the Supreme Court has been saying yes. But, it gets complicated, but you know what? Our democracy changes all the time.
Okay.
And so that's what I know about those things.
Let's pivot a bit. Are you thinking about introducing legislation dealing with the teaching of civics in our schools?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So the short answer is yes, because Gerard, it is unbelievable to kind of this point that how our generations don't understand civics. I don't know if it just didn't get taught, if it wasn't described, people weren't listening. I know it's not being taught. And when I say civics, I'm talking about federalism with a small f, federal versus local versus state versus local, checks and balances,
Sure.
The separation of powers, everything that's built into the Constitution. And we had, when the bill came up in committee in the Senate Education Committee last year, we had this discussion. And it was interesting because people said, like, look, you know, the things that you see out in the media and somebody saying this happened, well, you know, but Congress can't do it. Well, yes, they can, because they've been given the power. For example, and I'm not weighing in on one side or the other, but the tariffs that are going before the Supreme Court, and I was driving up here this morning, and it said the justices are looking askance on the president's use of the tariffs. And in the comments, it was because that act, the use of tariffs are given to Congress for the purpose of raising money, not to the executive branch. That's called separation of powers. And you know, we have to abide by that. We have to do that. That is what our democracy, our republic, is built on. And so, and look, the funnier part is, like, and people mean well, but look, we go home and say, hey, Brice, how's Washington doing? You know, and we're in Jackson, I'm a state senator. People mean well,
sure.
but we need to understand that, and we've lost that. I
agree.
And so it passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. The House, I hear, is I hope the House is going to take it up this year. There's a lot of people, and since the session, I've talked about it. It's generated a lot of support. I think we have a lot of outside support for that. I've had people come up and said, man, Senator Wiggins, that's a good bill. We need, because people, and look, to be honest, I think the social media effect has created a lot of problems, because, like, there's no barriers to social media, and people are weighing in, and it's just wrong when it comes to the Constitution. But also, I think that people want a black and white answer, and if you understand the Constitution, and I'm talking about the Mississippi and our U.S. Constitution, there's very limited black and white answers in there, and people think it's in there, and it's not. And it's, our democracy is based on the three branches interworking together.
I wonder if we shouldn't require students to pass a basic civics test.
This is what this is going to do.
Okay.
This is what, and the way the bill was structured last year was in your middle and high schools to have a year's worth of civics instruction, and you have to pass it, and you have to pass that course. They've done it in Utah. They've done it in a couple other states as well.
Okay.
So yes, we are saying you have to pass it, and not, by the way, not just your 8th grade, but not just 8th grade.
Right.
And you say this is where, you know, the state capitol is located. This is how the branches interact, separation of powers, checks and balances, so that we end up with a generation that are engaged citizens. And
I think you're right. Little on the lawmaking process, perhaps.
Yeah, because and look, I understand. This stuff can get dry and all that.
Yeah.
But when I go and speak, I like to talk about the lawmaking process, the making of the sausage, if you will.
Yeah.
People want to know. They have a right to know, and but they don't, because it was never taught.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was, you were going back over time, you know, when I grew up, it was the I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill, the Schoolhouse Rock. You remember that?
Oh, very well.
You know, and we don't have those anymore. I actually got it out and showed my kids. They thought that was a little goofy, but it was great, because everybody in my generation knew I'm a bill on Capitol Hill.
Yeah. All right. We got a final segment. If you want to stick around, we can continue the discussion, because I want to get you to react to the speaker's priority, which is school choice, see where you float on that one. And then also these rules around our state being part of the American Counselors Association, something I brought up in the last session. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, if you have any thoughts about that.
Sure.
We'll come back. We got a break right here. Final segment of middays on this Wednesday is coming. That's awesome.
I like that. Man, Johnny,
so well
that
done.
was great. Thank you very
he's awesome.
much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we got just a few minutes in this segment. It's about a 7.5-minute segment. So, the Speaker has made it clear that pursuing legislation that would implement a robust school choice program in the state of Mississippi is a top priority for him and many members of the House. Some, as you well know, aren't necessarily on board with him, depending on their constituencies and the districts. The lieutenant governor's never been a fan, although he has signaled recently an interest in at least allowing students to transfer freely in public schools, so-called open enrollment. In the past, he's always qualified that with only D and F, and he's interchangeably used district and school, and there is a difference, as you know, between that. But all that to say, where do you stand and where do you think this is going in the next session?
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk about that. I've been on the Senate Education Committee since I got in the legislature, and this isn't the first time we've had this debate. Look, I think where things stand right now, and you hate to say it, but there is no bill right now.
Right.
And it's hard getting people certainly to commit as a legislator if I don't see it, and I get that.
Yeah.
And so, I think what the Speaker, and I give the Speaker credit for getting out and having the debate, because it's not an easy debate to have, and he's out there setting that tone.
Yeah.
And so to the extent that what it's going to look like, I don't know. Okay. So, and there's a lot of different things that fall under the school choice banner, and so what is that going to look like? We don't know. Of course, the Senate...
Whatever can pass is what it looks like.
Well, and that's starting to be what it does look like. I can tell you what did. You mentioned portability. We passed portability in the Senate last year. We passed a version of portability. What you were talking about, the lieutenant governor, about moving...
I missed that.
Moving between that. And down on the coast, this may be where the lieutenant governor got it. Down on the coast, we have a version of portability.
Yes, some
anyway.
agreements. Yeah,
you have that.
But there's some tuition associated with that for the local portion.
And I think you're getting into what is a big issue is this unfettered. Let's just let everybody know accountability. We cannot not have accountability.
Sure,
and that is a fact. Okay. And I was thinking about what is a to address that. What is a good kind of structure? And I've been on your show talking about the Early Learning Collaborative Act, which we passed, which is part of our success. And that was structured that had a, quote, lead partner, which was a nonprofit or a school district, because they have to abide by the actual accounting principles and have to be have to abide by and stay out of fraud. Okay?
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And, I also want to say this, Gerard, that I do a lot of work in youth court. I'm the chairman of JudA. And by the way, I went on Empower's podcast and talked about school choice.
Heard it, yeah.
And, the argument that, parents, just let the parents, let me say this. If you've ever walked into a youth court, the reason those children are there is because those parents' decisions were not good. The fact of the matter is we have parents in this state who it's a minority who are not making good decisions. That's why you have children in youth court being adopted because their parents have been on drugs or something like that. Okay, what I'm saying is I'm not casting a blanket. What I'm saying is the fact of the matter is the decisions being made for the welfare of children are not always the best in the state. Okay, and so my kids went to public school. My mother was a librarian at a private school, Resurrection Catholic School. So we have experience on that. Okay. And I understand the where people are coming from. And so, I think that we need to see what the bill's going to look like, and then what are the particular issues that we need to address.
Well, so I missed the portability bill, Rhino. I'm a little surprised that I don't remember that. So here's the question: what happened?
There was a lot going on last session.
I know that, but the bill that passed the House got pocket vetoed by Senator DeBar. That's
Well,
Jansen
and then there were
Owens' bill.
then there were.
Well, what happened to the Senate bill?
It went, as I understand, it went back over there in some other legislation, and we were exchanging bills at that point. Let me put it that way.
Okay, it must have been embedded in something else.
Yeah, that's right. So, and then I think that looking at a version of the Tim Tebow Act, which was that we actually the Senate passed last year with accountability measures in there. People recognize that times are changing, and so I'm open to looking at different things. I certainly want to do that. But we have to be, devil's in the details, and we just need to look at that as these things come.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Senator Brice